Hi everyone. We left off in the nursery and the little boy wanted his bunny and he had said, "Give me my bunny," to the Nana or the nanny, and she had said, all that fuss for a toy, and he said, "You mustn't say that. He isn't a toy. He's real." When the little rabbit heard that, he was happy, for he knew that what the Skin Horse had said was true at last. The nursery magic had happened to him, and he was a toy no longer. He was real. The boy himself had said it. That night he was almost too happy to sleep, and so much love stirred inside his little sawdust heart that it almost burst, and into his boot-button eyes that had long ago lost their polish there came a look of wisdom and beauty, so that even Nana noticed it the next morning when she picked him up and said, "I declare if that old bunny hasn't got quite a knowing expression." That was a wonderful summer. Near the house where they lived, there was a wood, and in the long June evenings, the boy liked to go there after tea to play. He took the Velveteen Rabbit with him, and before he wandered off to pick flowers or play among the trees, he always made the rabbit a little nest somewhere among the bracken, where he would be quite cozy, for he was a kind-hearted little boy, and he liked Bunny to be comfortable. One evening, while the rabbit was lying there alone, watching the ants that ran to and fro beneath his velvet paws in the grass, he saw two strange beings creep out of the tall bracken near him. They were rabbits like himself, but quite furry and brand new. They must have been very well made, for their seams didn't show at all, and they changed shape in a weird way when they moved, and one minute they were long and thin, and then the next minute they were fat and bunchy, and instead of always staying the same like he did. Their feet patted softly on the ground, and they crept quite close to him, twitching their noses, while the rabbit stared hard to see which side the clockwork stuck out, for he knew that people who jump generally have something to wind them up, but he couldn't see it. They were evidently a new kind of rabbit altogether. They stared at him, and the little rabbit stared back, and all the time their noses twitched. "Why don't you get up and play with us?" one of them asked. "I don't feel like it," said the rabbit, for he didn't want to explain that he had no clockwork. "Huh," said the furry rabbit. "It's as easy as anything." And he gave a big hop sideways and stood up on his hind legs. "I don't even believe you can." "I can," said the little rabbit. "I can jump higher than anything." He meant when the boy threw him, of course, but he didn't want to say so. "Can you hop on your hind legs?" asked the furry rabbit. That was a dreadful question, for the Velveteen Rabbit had no hind legs at all. The back of him was made all in like one piece, like a pincushion. He sat still in the bracken and hoped that the other rabbits wouldn't notice. I just don't want to," he said again. But the wild rabbits have very sharp eyes, and this one stretched out his neck and looked. "He hasn't got any hind legs," he called out. "Fancy a rabbit with no hind legs!" And he began to laugh. I have," cried the little rabbit. "I have got hind legs. I'm sitting on them." "Then stretch out and show me like this," said the wild rabbit. And he began to whirl around and dance till the little rabbit got quite dizzy. "I don't like dancing," he said. "I'd rather just sit still." But the whole while he was longing to dance, for a funny new tickly feel ran through him, and he felt like he'd give anything in the world to be able to jump around like these rabbits did. The strange rabbit stopped dancing and came quite close. He came so close this time that his long whiskers brushed the Velveteen Rabbit's ear, and he wrinkled his nose suddenly and flattened his ears and jumped backwards. "He doesn't smell right," he exclaimed. "He isn't a rabbit at all. He isn't real." "I am real," said the little rabbit. "I am real. The boy said so." And he nearly began to cry. Just then there were the sound of footsteps, and the boy ran past near them, and with a stamp of feet and a flash of white tails, the two strange rabbits disappeared. "Come back and play with me," called the little rabbit. "Oh, do come back. I know I am real." But there was no answer. Only the little ants ran to and fro, and the bracken swayed gently where the two strangers had passed. The Velveteen Rabbit was all alone. "Oh dear," he thought. "Why did they run away like that? Why couldn't they stop and talk to me?" For a long time he lay very still, watching the bracken and hoping they'd come back. But they never returned. And presently the sun sank lower and the little white moth sputtered out, and the boy came and carried him home. Weeks passed, and the little rabbit grew very old and shabby. But the boy loved him just as much. He loved him so hard that all his whiskers came off, and the pink lining to his ears turned gray, and his brown spots faded. He even began to lose his shape, and he scarcely looked like a rabbit anymore, except to the boy. To him he was always beautiful, and that was all that the little rabbit cared about. He didn't mind how he looked to other people, because the nursery magic had made him real. And when you are real, shabbiness doesn't matter. And then one day, the boy was ill. His face grew very flushed, and he talked in his sleep, and his little body was so hot that it burned the rabbit when he held him close. Strange people came and went in the nursery, and a light burned all night, and through it, all the little Velveteen Rabbit, he just lay there, hidden from sight under the bedclothes, and he never stirred, for he was afraid that if they found him, someone might take him away, and he knew that the little boy needed him. It was a long, weary time, for the boy was too ill to play, and the little rabbit found it rather dull. Nothing to do all day. But he snuggled down patiently and looked forward to the time when the boy should be well again. And they would go out in the garden amongst the flowers and the butterflies and play splendid games in the raspberry thicket like they used to. All sorts of delightful things he planned, and while the boy lay half asleep, he crept up close to the pillow and whispered them in his ear. And presently the fever turned, and the boy got better. He was able to sit back up in bed and look at picture books while the little rabbit cuddled close at his side. And one day, they let him get up and dress. In this story, the little boy has something called scarlet fever, and it's kind of like a strep throat. Nowadays, we have cures and medicine to fix that, but back in this day, in the 1900s, this was the most common things that young children would die of. So I'm glad we found medicines and things for that, but they were going through kind of what we are right now. The children would get sick, and they would just hope that they would get better. And in this case, this little boy does. It was a bright sunny morning, and the window stood wide open. They had carried the boy out onto the balcony, wrapped in a shawl, and the little rabbit lay tangled up among the bedclothes, thinking. The boy was going to the seaside tomorrow. Everything was arranged, and now it only remained to carry out the doctor's orders. They talked all about it, while the little rabbit lay under the bedclothes, with just his head peeping out, and listened. The room was to be disinfected, and all the books and the toys that the boy had played with in the bed must be burned. Now we have things that we can clean with, but back then, if they felt that there were bad germs on things, they would burn them. Kind of a big problem. "Hurrah," thought the little rabbit, "tomorrow we're going to go to the seaside." For the boy had often talked about the sea, and he wanted very much to see the big waves coming in and the tiny crabs and the little sandcastles. Just then Nana caught sight of him. "How about this old bunny?" she asked. "What?" asked the doctor. "Why, that's a mass of scarlet fever germs. Burn it at once." "What?" "No, nonsense. Get him a new one. He mustn't have that anymore." And so the little rabbit was put into a sack with the old picture books and a lot of rubbish, and carried out to the end of the garden behind the fowl house. That would be like a chicken house. That was a fine place to make a bonfire. Only the gardener was just too busy right then to attend to it. He had potatoes to dig and green peas to gather, but the next morning he promised to come quite early and burn the whole lot. That night the boy slept in a different bedroom, and he had a new bunny to sleep with him. It was a splendid bunny. It was all white plush with real glass eyes. But the boy was too excited to care very much about it, for tomorrow he was going to the seaside, and that in itself was such a wonderful thing that he couldn't think of anything else. While the boy was asleep dreaming of the seaside, the little rabbit lay among the old picture books in the corner behind the fowl house, and he felt very lonely. The sack had been left untied, and so by wriggling a bit, he was able to get his head through the opening and look out. He was shivering a little, for he had always been used to sleeping in a proper bed, and by this time his coat had worn so thin and threadbare from hugging that it was no longer any protection to him. Nearby he could see the thicket of raspberry canes growing tall and close like a tropical jungle, in whose shadow he had played with the boy on bygone mornings. He thought of those long sunlit hours in the garden, how happy they were, and a great sadness came over him. He seemed to see them all pass before him, each one more beautiful than the other. The fairy huts and the flower bed and the quiet evenings in the wood where he had lay in the bracken and the little ants had ran over his paws. The wonderful day when he knew that he was real. For the thought of the skin horse, so wise and gentle, and all that he had told him. Of what use was it to be loved and lose one's beauty and become real if it all ended like this? And then a tear, a real tear, trickled down his little shabby velvet nose and fell to the ground. And then a strange thing happened. For where the tear had fallen, a flower grew out of the ground, a mysterious flower, not at all like any that grew in the garden. It had slender green leaves, the color of emeralds, and in the center of the leaves, a blossom like a golden cup. It was so beautiful that the little rabbit forgot to cry and just lay there watching it. And then the blossom opened, and out of it stepped a fairy. She was quite the loveliest fairy in the whole world. Her dress was of pearl and dewdrops, and there were flowers round her neck and in her hair, and her face was like the most perfect flower of all. And she came so close to the little rabbit and gathered him up in her arms and kissed him on his velveteen nose that was damp from the crying. "Little rabbit," she said, "don't you know who I am?" The rabbit looked up at her, and didn't seem to him that he'd ever seen her face before. That he had seen her face before, but he couldn't think of where. "I am the nursery magic fairy," she said. "I take care of all the playthings that the children have loved. And when they are old and worn out and the children don't need them anymore, then I come and take them with me, and I turn them into real." "Wasn't I real before?" asked the little rabbit. "You were real to the boy," the fairy said, "because he loved you. Now you shall be real to everyone." And she held the little rabbit close in her arms and flew with him into the wood. It was light now, for the moon had risen and all the forest was beautiful, and the fronds of the bracken shone like frosted silver. In the open glade between the tree trunks, the wild rabbits danced with their shadows on the velvet grass, but when they saw the fairy, they all stopped dancing and stood round in a ring to stare at her. "I've brought you a new playfellow," the fairy said. "You must be very kind to him and teach him all he needs to know in Rabbit Land, for he's going to live with you forever and ever." And she kissed the little rabbit again and put him down on the grass. "Run and play, little rabbit," she said. But the little rabbit just sat there quite still for a moment and never moved. For when he saw the wild rabbits dancing around him, he suddenly remembered he didn't have hind legs, and he didn't want them to see that he was made all in one piece. He didn't know that when the fairy had kissed him that last time, she had changed him altogether. And he might have sat there a long time, too shy to move, if just then something hadn't tickled his nose. And before he thought what he was doing, he lifted his hind legs to scratch it. And he found that he actually did have hind legs. Instead of the dingy velveteen, he had brown fur, soft and shiny, and his eyes twitched by themselves, and his whiskers were so long that they brushed the grass. He gave one leap, and the joy of using those hind legs was so great that he went springing about the turf on them, springing sideways and whirling around just like the others did. And he grew so excited that when at last he did stop to look for the fairy, she was gone. He was a real rabbit at last, at home with all the other rabbits. And autumn passed in winter, and in the spring the days grew warm and sunny. The boy went out to play in the wood behind the house. And while he was playing, 2 rabbits crept out from the bracken and peeped at him. One of them was brown all over, but the other one had strange markings under his fur, as though long ago he had been spotted. And the spots still showed through, and about his little soft nose and his round black eyes, there was something familiar to that boy. And he thought to himself, why, he looks just like my old bunny that was lost when I had scarlet fever. But he never really knew that it really was his own bunny, come back to look at the child who had first helped him to be real. That's the end of the Velveteen Rabbit, boys and girls. I hope you like that story. It is on AR, and I hope you will take that AR quiz. I don't have the number, but you can type that out. And keep having your great imaginations. All right, we'll talk soon. Bye-bye.